All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into the world of Jordan Peterson.
Oh, this is going to be interesting.
It is, right?
Yeah.
There's just so much to unpack there. We're going to be exploring some of his most, well, I guess you could say controversial or maybe just thought-provoking ideas, and we'll see how they connect with society, particularly young people today.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't shy away from complex topics.
Not at all.
And his ideas, well, they resonate with a lot of folks.
They do.
Even if you don't agree with everything he says.
Right, and we're not here to endorse or debunk anything.
Right.
We're just going to explore. We've got a ton of his lectures and interviews to dig through, so let's just jump right in.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So one of the biggest themes that runs through Peterson's work is this idea of personal responsibility.
Yeah, you can't really talk about Peterson without talking about responsibility.
It's like the foundation for everything else he talks about.
He really stresses that it's the bedrock of a meaningful life.
And he has this really interesting way of putting it.
Oh, yeah, he's got that great quote, something like, responsibility, that's what gives life meaning. It's like lifting a load. Then you can tolerate yourself. Useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there.
Lift a load. I like that. It's so simple but powerful, you know?
Totally.
But what does he mean by load, though?
Well, it could be anything that challenges you, anything that requires effort and discipline.
So not just like doing the dishes or finishing your homework.
Yeah, no, it's bigger than that. It's about choosing something meaningful.
A commitment to a cause, a personal goal, maybe?
Yeah, something that contributes to the world in some way.
Which makes me think about something I've always found curious.
What's that?
Peterson often talks about how his message resonates with young people, especially young men. Why do you think that is?
Well, he suggests it might have something to do with how we raise boys, you know, societal expectations around masculinity and all that.
Right, like maybe men are wired to find purpose in taking responsibility.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also his future authoring program. Oh, right, where people map out their ideal future.
Yeah. And he found that it had a particularly strong impact on men.
Especially the ones who weren't doing so well academically.
Exactly, like they were searching for that direction, that load to lift.
Which leads us to another of his big ideas.
What, the pitfalls of instant gratification?
Yeah, the whole impulsive low-class pleasure thing.
Oh, right, he uses that Pleasure Island analogy.
From Pinocchio, that place where the boys can do whatever they want.
But they end up turning into donkeys.
It's a pretty vivid image.
Definitely. And it's his way of warning against chasing short-term thrills without considering the long-term consequences.
Which is interesting because he ties this to his critique of modern society.
You mean that thing about the overemphasis on individual rights?
Exactly. He thinks we've become so fixated on what we're entitled to that we've forgotten about the responsibilities that come with it.
It's like we want all the pleasure with none of the pain.
Which I guess brings us back to that balance between enjoying life and being responsible. Right. Recognizing that our choices have consequences. And that real meaning often comes from striving for something more than just instant gratification. Which actually connects nicely with his whole thing about finding your calling and aiming high.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that.
He talks about how purpose isn't just something you stumble upon.
Right, you don't just trip over it one day.
It emerges through conscious effort, you know, working towards something.
He uses that story about starting to lift weights.
Oh, yeah, the one where he wasn't naturally strong.
But he gradually built his strength over time.
That's a great analogy.
And he also brings up this Matthew principle thing.
Right, the whole the rich get richer idea.
But applied to success in general.
Yeah, like the more you achieve, the more confident you become, and that propels you towards even bigger achievements.
It's like a snowball effect.
Exactly. And just as important, he stresses the importance of aiming up. Like setting goals that are genuinely challenging.
So don't just aim for the bare minimum. Push yourself.
Exactly. Embrace the struggle, the load, and find meaning in that process. And this actually ties into a whole other fascinating side of Peterson, the way he looks at religion and myth.
Ah, yes, the controversial stuff.
He doesn't see religion as just about dogma and rituals.
But as a source of wisdom and guidance.
Yeah, he's really into the stories, the archetypes.
Like the story of Abraham, for instance.
He sees Abraham as this model of someone who answers a higher calling.
Leaving behind the comfortable and venturing into the unknown.
It's a powerful image.
So it's not just about believing in a specific God.
It's about that willingness to step outside your comfort zone and strive for something greater than yourself.
Which is pretty relevant for young people today, I think. I mean, there's so much pressure to conform, to follow the crowd.
Definitely. And Peterson is all about breaking free from that.
Wow, we've already covered so much. Responsibility, instant gratification, finding your calling, religion, and we haven't even scratched the surface of his ideas about society and chaos.
I know, right? There's so much more to dive into. Welcome back. Now, before the buck, we were talking about finding your calling, stepping outside your comfort zone, all that.
And it got me thinking about all the pressure young people face these days. You know, all that pressure to fit in.
Ah, yeah. That's something Peterson talks about quite a bit, actually. He emphasizes the importance of, well, how does he put it? Integrating your lower order impulses into a more sophisticated voluntary structure.
Lower order impulses. Can you break that down a bit?
Basically, those primal urges we all have, you know? The desire for pleasure, avoiding pain, reacting emotionally.
So those are the lower order impulses.
Right. Like natural human instincts.
Yeah.
But Peterson says those can lead you astray if you're not careful.
So it's not about getting rid of those impulses entirely?
No, not at all. He believes real maturity comes from integrating them, you know, fitting them into a framework of values and goals.
Instead of just being controlled by your emotions, you learn to channel that energy towards something more meaningful.
Exactly. And that's where responsibility comes in again. Choosing to act in line with your values, even when it's tough, even when you want to just give in to those impulses.
He uses that example of his son, right?
Yeah, his son was strong-willed, needed some guidance navigating those impulses.
It's not about just setting rules for no reason.
More about helping young people develop that inner compass.
That self-control that comes from understanding, well, why certain things are okay in some situations, but not others.
And the really interesting thing is how Peterson connects this to religion, even neurobiology.
Okay, now we're going deep. Religion.
He talks about how a lot of those ancient deities, they actually represented these basic motivational systems.
So, like, the god of war equals rage, the goddess of love. Well, that's pretty straightforward.
Right. Our ancestors were trying to understand these powerful forces inside us, you know? The drives that can lead to great things or total destruction.
And he suggests that the shift from polytheism to monotheism.
Could mirror our own psychological development.
As we mature, we learn to integrate all these different impulses under a single unifying purpose.
Exactly. Instead of being pulled in a million directions by your desires, you align them with something higher, a set of values to guide your actions.
It's about finding that balance again, right?
Responsibility and meaning. If you channel those powerful impulses towards something good, something that contributes to the world.
The responsibility isn't about denying yourself.
It's about becoming the best version of yourself. Self-actualization, I think that's the word he uses.
That's a lot to think about. But we were talking earlier about Peterson's criticisms of society, too.
Oh, yeah, the whole overemphasis on individual rights thing.
He's pretty worried about what he calls narcissistic individualism,
where people are so focused on what they deserve.
that they forget about their obligations to others.
To the bigger picture.
And he sees this everywhere, from identity politics to the decline of institutions like family and religion.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from pointing those things out.
But he's not saying we need to go back to the past, right?
No, not at all. He's not advocating for authoritarianism or suppressing individual rights.
His solution is actually way more individualistic.
It's all about personal transformation.
Not waiting for someone else to come fix things.
You be the change you want to see.
Which sounds great in theory, but where do you even start?
Peterson's got some pretty practical advice there, too. Start small. Get your own house in order.
Like literally clean your room.
Exactly. Sounds simple, but he sees it as a fundamental act of responsibility. Self-discipline.
Creating order in your own life, and then maybe that expands outward.
And then set goals. But not just any goals, you know, aim high. Goals that are challenging, that really matter to you, and then break them down into smaller steps.
Incremental progress. We talked about that before. Not trying to do everything at once.
Right. It's not just about reaching some finish line.
It's about becoming a better person along the way.
Building character.
But what about when we mess up? Because that's going to happen, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Peterson's very upfront about that. Failures happen. He even encourages people to be honest about their limitations, their failures.
And to see those failures as, what, learning experiences.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect. It's about becoming more resilient. And you know what? Don't forget humor.
Oh, right. He talks about that too.
You got to be able to laugh at yourself a little.
Not take yourself too seriously.
Have a sense of perspective, especially in today's climate with all the outrage and polarization.
That's something he really pushes back against.
He sees all that outrage as a problem, actually.
Like a sign that we've lost something important.
That ability to be playful, to be open to other viewpoints, even if you disagree with them.
He uses Joe Rogan as an example, right?
Yeah, Rogan's willing to have conversations with all sorts of people, even people he disagrees with.
It's about listening, learning, engaging in good faith. So it sounds like Peterson is offering this whole path toward meaning and purpose.
That's grounded in responsibility, self-improvement, contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Now that we're wrapping up this deep dive, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how all of this connects with the challenges young people face today? What stands out to you? You know, it's kind of funny, right? Like Peterson's message, it almost seems like it's going against the grain of what a lot of young people are told these days.
Yeah, there's definitely a contrast there. He's not exactly preaching the gospel of comfort and self-esteem.
No, definitely not. More like embrace the struggle, find meaning and responsibility, all that. He keeps coming back to that story of Abraham, too. Why do you think that is? What's so compelling about that story for him?
Well, I think for Peterson, Abraham represents like the ultimate example of answering a higher calling, leaving everything behind to venture into the unknown, taking a huge risk.
Yeah, and ending up, the father of nations. It's a pretty epic story.
Right. And it ties into his whole point about responsibility as a source of meaning, especially responsibility for others.
Yeah.
Like that's where real purpose comes from.
Which, I guess, is why he sees that message resonating so much with men. Remember that anecdote he shared about his future authoring program?
Oh, yeah, the one where he noticed it had a bigger impact on the guys who were struggling, especially the ones who hadn't found success in traditional academics.
It's like they were craving that sense of purpose, It's something to strive for.
Definitely. And he's pointed out, too, that most of his audience, both online and at his live events, tends to be male. It's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes you wonder why that is. Why are men, particularly younger men, drawn to his message?
It's tough to say for sure. But Peterson thinks it might have something to do with, how boys are raised, expectations around masculinity, maybe even some kind of innate need for men to find meaning through taking on responsibility.
It's definitely a different approach than that whole chasing after impulsive, low-class pleasure thing he talks about.
Yeah, that's like the opposite of what he's advocating. Remember that Pleasure Island analogy he uses?
Oh yeah, from Pinocchio. Where the boys get lured into this life of indulgence, but they end up turning into donkeys.
It's a pretty striking image.
Yeah, not exactly a happy ending. And it connects to that broader societal critique he has, too. The one about the overemphasis on individual rights, but without the corresponding emphasis on responsibility.
Right. It's like we've swung the pendulum too far in one direction. We're all about freedom and what we're entitled to, but we've forgotten about the flip side.
The obligations, the duty, all that.
Exactly. And Peterson sees that imbalance as contributing to a lot of the problems we face, that sense of chaos and decline he talks about.
But he's not just complaining about things. He offers solutions, too.
Right. He's all about individual transformation.
So not waiting for the government or some authority figure to fix everything.
It's up to each of us to make a change. Start with ourselves.
And he suggests some pretty down-to-earth ways to do that, too, like that whole clean your room thing.
Yeah. Sounds basic, but he really believes in the power of creating order in your own life. Like it's a foundation for everything else.
And then setting goals.
Yeah.
But not just any goals, right? Aiming high, finding things that truly matter to you.
Right. Find that challenge and then break it down into smaller steps.
Incremental progress. We've talked about that before.
It's not about overnight success. It's about consistently moving forward, one step at a time.
And along the way, becoming a better person.
Yeah, developing character.
But what about when you stumble? Because let's be real, we all mess up sometimes.
Oh, for sure. And Peterson's very open about that. He actually encourages people to be honest about their limitations, their failures even.
And to see those failures as, what? Opportunities to learn.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect. It's about becoming more resilient, more adaptable. And you know what? Don't forget the importance of humor.
Oh, yeah. He talks about that a lot, too.
You got to be able to laugh at yourself sometimes.
Not take yourself too seriously, especially in today's world with everyone so easily offended.
Peterson really pushes back against that. He sees that outrage culture as a problem. Like it's stopping us from having real conversations, from exploring ideas, even disagreeing with each other in a healthy way.
Yeah, it's like we've lost that sense of playfulness, that curiosity.
Right. And he contrasts that with someone like Joe Rogan, who's willing to talk to anyone, even people he completely disagrees with.
So it's about being open-minded, willing to listen, even when it's challenging.
Exactly. Engaging in good faith.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Jordan Peterson, I think what strikes me most is the sense of hope he offers, even with all the warnings about the challenges we face.
He doesn't sugarcoat things, that's for sure.
No, but ultimately, his message is empowering. It's a reminder that we all have the capacity to make a difference, to take responsibility for our lives, face our challenges head-on, and strive to be better.
It's a message that resonates with a lot of people, for sure.
Yeah, and it's something we can all learn from, I think. So, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving for a life of meaning and purpose.